Hello and welcome back to The Distracted Gardener. I am Charlie, the Distracted Gardener. I hope whenever you're listening to today's episode that it finds you healthy and happy. My little part of the great wide world, Echizen City, here in Fukui Prefecture, Japan, is in a slightly depressed mood today. We had two back-to-back 17-degree Celsius, right, 62 degrees Fahrenheit days that were just blue skies and sunshine. And that meant that I could put in a lot of work at the school garden. And it meant the hyacinths, anemones, and other bulb flowers, right, put on some good growth over a few days here in the veranda garden, which is really exciting to see. I'm bringing hyacinths for the first time. They're part of like a lasagna bed setup that I started last year, so I'm just going to keep them in the beds that they're in now and just sort of let it be an annual thing. But it was interesting to see actually that hyacinths come out looking like, I don't even know, like a honeycomb kind of thing. Anyway, I'm excited to see them when they bloom. Hopefully it won't be too long. Today, Sunday, March 17th, we're sitting at a comfy 13 degrees, which is I guess like 55 degrees Fahrenheit, but it was kind of a gray and drizzly day. And tomorrow it's going to be cold, then it's going to shoot back up to like same as today or so, and it's going to be sunny, so I'm looking forward to that. But we're also supposed to have a few nice days, as I said, and then we're going to drop back into snow before we fully settle into like spring temperatures, it looks like later on in the week. As a Western New Yorker, I love the snow, and I'm used to the snow, and I love all sort of snowy activities, but I am well and totally over winter this year, and I'm just sort of readying or readied for the gardening season to kick off in full, and I want to get back into hiking and all that stuff, but just a little bit of a waiting game. So we've talked over the last few episodes about all the preparation going into the coming blooming of spring, but I haven't talked yet about a really big change that's happening in my house, and therefore, well, I suppose more than in my house and in my garden, but this year for the first time, there's sort of like no opposition to my gardening. At least when I say in my house, I mean for my wife. It's a big, important change. And I guess I should say that it wasn't ever that she was actively against gardening, but it was, the first year was something like, I guess if you want to, I don't know why you do it, but if you want to, go for it. Then the second year was like, I think you're overdoing it a bit, but whatever. And then last year was sort of like, hey, you should grow some more okra, or why don't you try growing like, what is that called? Sanchu, which is like it's like a leafy vegetable, I guess, that you normally you'll wrap like grilled meat or something in. And then this year, today actually, my wife transported some pea seedlings outside. The peas were something she asked me to plant specifically so that she'd have an easy veg that would just be hers to grow and take care of. And she also asked for her own pair of gardening gloves because she doesn't want to touch soil, she doesn't want to touch bugs. So that was an easy concession to make. At some point, and I'd be hard pressed to say exactly when, my wife turned into a baby gardener. And, I'm absolutely thrilled about it. Truly, truly thrilled. I'll be happy if she's out there with me a little bit, But it made me think about all the opposition you might face when getting into gardening, both from family and friends, because, of course, in this sense, I'm talking about my wife, but I've had some sort of negative feedback from other family members and friends, and so it's just something I want to talk about because I imagine that these will be some things that maybe you'll experience if you're starting out, or maybe they're things you already have experienced. And the last thing I want is for anybody to get discouraged out of this, because as I'm sure you realize, I believe this is a really important thing. I think every household should as much as possible be growing things for themselves. But yeah, that right there, opposition to gardening, is our topic for today. I think one of the strangest things that happens around gardening is how simultaneously supportive and unsupportive people can be about it. I think it starts when you tell friends and family There we go. That you're going to start a garden. People understand when you say you're going to like raise basil on the windowsill or maybe keep flowers near the front porch. When the conversation changes and it's growing on a plot, or you're keeping 20 different planters, the first response is often something like, why? Why go through all the trouble when you can find perfectly good vegetables at the supermarket? And I talk a lot about why you might not want to choose supermarket produce in episode 5. So if you haven't listened yet, please go ahead and check that out. It's not only that you might want to grow food for yourself, but it's also what you choose to grow. Like, if you grow like red tomatoes, if you grow cucumbers or other, sort of classic summer staples, right? Maybe even eggplant. Basically you're good to go, right? But if you grow black tomatoes, or you grow kohlrabi or carrots that are not orange, then sometimes what you hear is, why don't you just grow something normal, right? Sometimes you can't even give the vegetables away if they're a little bit off the beaten path. That's to say nothing of trying to cook them and serve them up to your family. And some of that is just certainly from a lack of familiarity, I think. But there's also a weird expectation at play, right? Tomatoes are round, they're red, they have unblemished skin. Peppers have no red spots mixed into the green, right? Bell peppers, for example, I don't know, it seems like a lot of people don't understand that a green bell pepper is an unripened bell pepper. And so sometimes naturally, if you get it a little bit after it started ripening, it's going to have a little bit of color in there. But anyhow, the supermarket bred belief that there is only one, meaning of beautiful produce is certainly a killer. Now, in my situation, I think the biggest obstacle that I faced was bugs. Particularly growing right outside our home on the veranda, means drawing insects directly to our home, right? I think it's a much different situation if I had like a plot of land that I was growing on, because obviously I'm probably not going to be bringing too many of those things home with me. The few that are on like whatever, what is that word, harvest, or whatever sticks to my clothes if I come home from a garden or something like that. I think it's a different situation. And with bugs, it's okay if those bugs are butterflies or the beautiful hawk moths that we get each year. But ants, aphids, hornets, bees, beetles, flies, there's so much more flying around out there than before I started gardening. And even sometimes not just bugs, but sometimes we'll get some frogs out there. I don't know how they make it up because we're on the second floor. I mean, obviously they can climb, but we haven't had a water feature until the one I just installed this year. So I don't know exactly what they were coming for or where they were hanging out. And we've also had yamori, which is like it's like a gecko basically. And we had a snake last year, and birds and all that kind of jazz. Well, birds are birds, I guess, but yeah, as I say, there's just so much more out there than there was before I started putting planters out there and gardening, 4 years ago. For the most part, as long as the bugs stay outside, it wasn't a problem, but they of course find their way in sometimes. And I think that's where sometimes there's a bit of contention, or I should put that in the past tense. Now, sort of related to this, right, is not just the bugs themselves, but this will sort of take us back to what we talked about at the beginning of the topic. But garden-grown fruit, and fruit I'm using here in a general sense, like also mean vegetables, are often misshapen, colored differently than their supermarket counterparts, etc., etc. And they also sometimes come damaged and very often come into the kitchen looking a little dirty. And when you buy cabbage at the supermarket, for example, it's really easy to not think about where it came from, what was living on it, and what was feeding on it. Something actually for me, even as the grower, that really used to get into my head was, I don't know if I'm going to grow it this year or not, but I used to grow, what is that called? Bok choy, and, or like mini bok choy. And I remember the first time I found like a pretty sizable patch of aphids on it, and it just stuck in my head. And I harvested the bok choy, and of course I blew off the aphids with a hose and all that stuff, and I brought the bok choy inside, and I cooked it up and I ate it. But I would be a liar to say that it wasn't in my head. Like I would be a liar to say that I wasn't sort of grossed out by the idea of eating a vegetable that was just covered with I mean, I don't need to describe it too much, I think, but it's you don't have to think about it when you buy it from a supermarket, right? It's almost like it just sort of spontaneous generation, right? Like a supermarket, just sort of like a popping noise happens, and all the veg just sort of appears. And as I said, it's much harder to separate those things, damage, bugs, when you harvest something and cook it on the same day. Gods know how many times I've harvested kale or some other leafy green for a salad and asked my wife or other family member to wash it. And the look of disgust I get when a few aphids, they come up floating, or whatever they're doing in the water that the veg was washed in. That's always a fun look to get. Oftentimes it's enough to put people off from eating the produce. Like I said, it's like a bug was on this, and no matter how many times I try to explain that bugs probably have touched every single vegetable they've ever had, and probably very quickly thereafter died from some sort of pesticide or whatever, it just doesn't matter. And the same goes for leafy greens and other produce that have some bug damage, right? Like with radish, for example, I've mentioned before that I love growing radish, growing radish. And with radish, we don't eat just the bulbous bit at the bottom. We also tend to use the leaves for pesto and other things. But if we use the leaves just as is and we just sort of like stir fry them, you can tell where they've gotten some kind of damage, where some kind of bug has taken holes out of the leaf. And yeah, especially at the beginning, that was a hard sell, being like, just eat it. It's fine. It's just a hole. It's fine. It's good. But yeah, it definitely took a little bit of convincing there for a while. Another thing that I've had trouble with, and this is sort of my own opposition, I suppose, at least towards the beginning of this whole journey, was the opposition to seasonal food. And as I said, this is a really big change for me. What am I trying to say? Moving away from the idea that it's normal to have like a tomato, year round, or it's completely normal to have a cucumber whenever you want it or whatever, right? I mean, of course, go get it if that's your thing. That's totally fine. But over the last 4 years, we have, and particularly since beginning to use the service called On the Slope, which I talked about in episode 5 as well, last fall, basically we eat 100% seasonally. That is to say, basically every vegetable we eat is grown and harvested in the season that it would normally grow, sort of naturally, so to speak, right? Obviously there's a lot of human tampering and what grows when and all that kind of jazz, and of course there's probably some season extension things happening there, greenhouses and whatnot. But generally we eat much more seasonally than we had pretty much ever. And I think the other day we had a few greenhouse raised tomatoes from like a local grower, and I realized that I hadn't eaten a tomato since like, I don't know, like October. And that blew my mind. That truly blew my mind. And it was delicious. I was like, holy crap, I haven't had a tomato in, what's that, 4 or 5 months. And I think my mouth definitely missed it. And it's just so weird. And it was weird because I'd just gone from having them whenever to now it being sort of like a, kind of almost like a treat. And I think that's something that's really great about eating seasonally too, is that things, you come to appreciate things a bit more. And of course, if I'm completely honest, I would love to eat, tomatoes, peppers, and other summer stuff in January and February. But knowing what it means to be able to eat those things at those time, talking about like the nutrition or lack thereof of that result from preservation methods and artificial ripening and stuff like that. It's just not something I really want to do, so I try to avoid them. But because of this, what I've just been talking about, for the last few months, we've been subsisting, mostly on potatoes, onion, leafy greens like kale, root crops, and mushrooms. There have been a lot of unusual vegetables, things like kale blossoms, onion tops, so many different varieties of turnips. I think until this year I hated turnips, taro root. At first, all of those things were really daunting for me because I had no idea what to do with them. But now it's like, the flavor is so different and it's so much better. And also coupled with, some of the nutritional and ecological stuff that we talked about before, I just don't think I could go back. And, it's all easy for me to make that kind of choice for myself. But it was a change that was not only hard for me, but it was also quite hard for my wife, because it seemed like until I started gardening would be wrong to say, but until recently, basically year round, almost every meal had some cucumbers and tomatoes and some vegetable like peppers or something in it, right? And those were things that were bought quote unquote fresh from the supermarket. Yeah, so I think that was probably a difficult change for her, but one that seems to be now that she seems to have adjusted to. So I'm happy and also thankful that she puts up with my crazy about that kind of thing. Now, I've talked about most of these negative responses to the hobby coming from my wife's reaction, but non-gardening friends too have asked me, man, why do you bother? Just, you put in so much time, you put in the sweat, save yourself the sweat and just go to the supermarket. You can get some, tomatoes for like $2, $3, whatever. They worry about bugs, and to be completely fair, other people have thought it's very cool and important to garden, so it's not like every reaction is bad, but that's also not the topic of the day, is it? And I can't claim to know what the solution is. I don't know necessarily what it takes to get people on board and to be supportive, at the very least, and to be active participants at the very most, at the very best. I don't know, but I can share what I think really helped out in my situation and finally brought my wife to slip on gardening gloves for the first time. I think the first biggest thing you can do is to be effusive in your passion. How many times did my wife sit next to me watching an epic gardening video only to have me translate all of the most interesting bits for her when it ended? She was always patient and always engaged in the conversation, but at some point her engagement went from polite to actual interest. I don't think it's possible for you to be I don't think you really care necessarily about 100% of what you're talking about, right? But you talk about those things to those people because you care and you want to have a relationship that, but at some point, as I say, that sort of stopped being that sort of arrangement where she was listening to be polite and to be a good partner. I think I remember one thing that I remember from the beginning was I told her some stuff that I had read from Merlin Sheldrake's book and from Michael Pollan's books. And at some point she wanted me to tell her as much as I could about, for example, what was it? Talking about, I think, how humans had evolved to consume alcohol, and how that had related to like the evolution of, and maybe even some form of control of yeast of humanity. It's not as crazy as it sounds. I'm doing a very good job. I'm doing a very poor job explaining it. But anyway, she was super hooked about that. But I have to say that thinking about it now, it was no easy time trying to explain all those things in Japanese. Now I think I could probably do it because I've been actively studying sort of that kind of language in Japanese. But yeah, at the time it was a thing. Now, beyond your passion, it is of course important to do the work and to do it well. The first year of gardening, I must have spent $500 on planters, soil, seeds, tools, The harvest wasn't great, nor was the response to my less than stellar return on investment. The second year, while I overdid it, the volume of tomatoes, peppers, okra, lettuce, etc., coming out of the garden were the pudding that was needed as proof, you know. The same goes for relatives and friends. I started getting less condescending responses when I started handing out homegrown tomatoes that tasted like nothing they'd be able to get from the supermarket. I take some pride in knowing two families that started gardening because of my refusing to shut up about it and because of my inundating them with delicious things. As for the trouble with bugs that we talked about, you know, there are people that you're just never going to convince. No matter what you say about the bumblebees or the horseflies, they are bugs. I have found, though, that more often than not, people are willing to learn to tolerate something if they know why. They should, I suppose. We don't use pesticides anywhere on our property anymore. I'm not joking when I say my in-laws would go through 2 cans of insecticidal spray per summer at the time when I moved in. And I remember when I was setting up the garden the first year, and basically on the veranda, there's the outdoor units for the first and second floor air conditioning systems, and inside of there, a long leg hornet had flown in and was very clearly making a mess. And the immediate response was to just spray that thing into oblivion. And obviously, I did not take too kindly to this response. And so, you know, at some point I explained what the bee was doing, what the other pollinators are actually doing that we see. What are all these bugs doing? You know, as best as I knew, because you know I was not as well read as I am now about those things. You know, and I really wanted to give people a realistic understanding of what was happening instead of just, you know, letting them believe all of the sort of things that we're told as kids about bugs, you know. And I also explained, like, you know, what happens when birds, for example, eat bugs that have ingested pesticides and all that kind of jazz. And anyway, long story short, it was agreed that we would stop using it. And I don't think anybody in my family became an insect lover because of that, but they have certainly come to tolerate their existence. And for me, for now, that's certainly enough. Now, the last thing I'll say, and maybe the easiest thing to implement is actually just to use preservation methods. To particularly, you know, we talked about switching over to eating seasonally. And I think, you know, using a variety of preservation techniques so that you can enjoy spring and summer flavors throughout the year will sort of help. I mean, I know it helped me, but also it probably helped my wife and other members of the family to sort of swallow the idea of eating more seasonally easier. Right, tomato sauces, hot sauces, frozen peppers, pickled cucumbers, dried tomatoes and peppers. There are a lot of simple things that you can do in very short periods of time that will allow you to have fresh-ish flavors, you know, from those summer vegetables in the dead of winter and through particularly tough times of the year like the Hungry Gap. So I feel like I am more rambly today than usual, but I hope I said something of interest, or at the very least, well, more than that, something that will be helpful if you're finding yourself facing opposition to gardening. And again, I want to point out, I'm quite thrilled that my wife has come around. I'm looking forward to her being. I mean, I don't expect her to be out there every day and helping me when bugs start appearing on things here sooner than later. But you know, I'm happy if she's out there and she's doing it for herself a little bit. So yeah, that is enough from me for the day. So I'll leave it to you. What sort of opposition have you run into in your gardening career, and what solutions did you find? Please let me know on Twitter, Instagram, or Threads at Natural Fukui. Also, before we go, I want to apologize for not getting the mushroom bucket post up on naturalfukui.com yet. It's been a lot getting ready for the new school year at my school, so I'm working on that post, but it's just excuse me, it's just I haven't had much time, so I hope to have it up soon. So on that note, thanks for listening, and I hope to see you back again next week.